Good morning. Welcome to our third international conference here in Dublin. We are excited to be here, and we are excited for our folks who are joining us live on Facebook Live. We have a phenomenal lineup of conversations planned for you today. And as I look at what's ahead, it makes me reflect on the past. Many of you may not be aware of how ONA came to be. Back in the late 90s, there were people that realized the potential of this thing you may have heard called the internet. They were often the ones in the newsrooms shouting that innovation was needed, that audiences would soon be changing the way that they consume news, and that this new medium would present new challenges as well as opportunities. But many people in the newsroom at the time did not listen to them. So they complained some more, and kept complaining. But not too long after that, they formed an organization that got folks together to help solve these problems. And that is how ONA came to be. So fast forward to 2017. No one would argue the importance of the internet today. At least I hope not. But I suspect many of you in this room are also the ones in your workplace shouting about innovation is needed. Just like the beginnings of ONA. You know that we must keep pace with the changing pace of technology, the shifting ways that audiences are engaging news, and the importance of not only the technology, but the fundamentals of journalism and continuing to build trust in our communities. Luckily, you are not alone. In this room, you are joined with nearly 200 outside-the-box thinkers just like you, ready to tackle the challenges of today. And we have an exciting lineup of speakers talking about issues such as push alerts, revenue, video strategy, analytics, and yes, fake news. Rest assured, you'll leave here today with strategies that you can take to your newsrooms, but more importantly, you'll leave with friends in your quest for innovation. And it doesn't end here today. At ONA, we truly believe that technology has made the world a much smaller place. And now, more than ever, is the time for journalists around the world to be connected. And at ONA, we want to be that connector. We have a number of ways to stay involved. First, we're currently accepting submissions for our online journalism awards, which are the only awards exclusively dedicated to honoring the best in digital journalism. Entries are open until June 8th, and we encourage everyone from our international community to apply. Plus, the added benefit, it comes with $50,000 of prize money. You can visit our website at journalist.org to visit more information about that. Another thing we're doing, we're also building communities. One of the new communities that we're building around people who are interested in immersive storytelling. Last year, we launched an initiative, Journalism 360, with our partners at Google News Lab and the Knight Foundation. And the idea is to bring people connected around those that want to learn about and know more about how the intersection of immersive technology and journalism collide. I encourage everyone to visit our blog on Medium and by searching for Journalism 360. We are also fortunate to have volunteers today that will be taking 360 pictures throughout the conference, so I encourage you to do that. And lastly, at the heart of what we do is our ONA Local program. And for those of you that don't know about ONA Local, I encourage you to get involved. It's a global network of volunteers that are really building community around their local areas through events. And keep in mind, these are done through volunteers, so they have a day job. But it really is a way to keep connected. I guarantee you, after you leave here today, you'll leave with a certain sense of energy, and you'll want to keep that energy going, and ONA Local is the way to do that. And luckily for the people here that in Dublin, we have a strong ONA Local Dublin group. And we have two of our ONA Local leaders here today, Anya Kerr, who is the manager of partnerships at Facebook, and Liam Corcoran, who is head of communications at NewsWhip. Liam is currently outside, but Anya will be here to say a few words on behalf of ONA Local.
Thank you, Irving. I'm going to practice brevity for the first time in my life and just simply extend a really warm welcome to all of you. It is such a thrill to be here in Dublin today. Many of you have been at so many conferences the last couple of months, and there's some in the room, particularly Storyful, NewsWhip, Mark Little, Amory, and others. And we're always so proud when you go abroad and people come up to you and you go, oh my God, the Irish Mafia are here. So that we've been able to bring a conference of this repute and standing to Dublin is such a proud moment, I know, for so many of us here today. So just thank you for embracing this. And for those of you who have been involved with the ONA local chapter here, as Irving said, like this is your opportunity to be part of a journalism community in your own country, in your own city. We've met numerous times last year, and it's very much about solutions-driven journalism, exchanging ideas, concepts, case studies. We're going to have our next event in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So please come follow us on ONA Ireland on Twitter. There's about 600, 700 people very active. On Facebook, we have a private group, and we also have a Meetup website. Again, there's about 600 people registered for our event. So just if you're in Ireland, get involved in that. It's a great opportunity to network with your peers and learn from each other, and just have a fabulous day today. This is one of the best conferences where you just get to nerd out for the day. So enjoy, and look forward to meeting lots of you later in the day. Thank you so much. And at this moment, I'm going to head over to our Facebook head of Ireland, Garrett Lamb, to also extend a welcome. Thanks, Garrett.
Thanks, Anya. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Facebook's international headquarters. My name is Gareth Lamb, and I lead our operation here in Ireland. And we love having visitors come here, whether it be clients or policymakers or other really important stakeholders like the media industry. It's wonderful to have you here. This came about Anya's ask, I guess, to have it here from our journalism project, our Facebook journalism project, which is our effort to forge deeper connections with this industry. So for me, it was a cast iron no-brainer. So great to have you here. I in particular love having international audiences here when the weather is so amazing. Before we lowered the blinds and made this into an apocalyptic bunker, I hope you observed the weather. Go back home, tell all your friends. I have aggressive hiring targets. There's a lot of misinformation about the weather here, which I need to change. A couple of minutes, just context on where you are. As I said, this is our international headquarters. You would have come straight up the elevators here, but in the other 6 floors in this building, we have 1,700 people working here. This is our largest operation outside of our Silicon Valley headquarters. We've just taken another building across the river with expansion for another 1,000 people. We're building a data center about 25 minutes away in County Meath, which will be ready at the end of the year. And we also acquired a small virtual reality research company in County Cork. So we have a pretty big footprint in terms of physical locations, as well as serious growth in our number of people working here. The kinds of functions here, the teams we have over 50 teams here in our international headquarters. The largest is our community operations team, which is the team responsible for the trust and safety of our users. So we have hundreds of those people here looking after our users all around the world. We also have large sales teams, in particular for the SMB, or small and medium-sized businesses around Europe, Middle East, and Africa. We have infrastructure engineering, so engineers for data centers, finance operations, and dozens of other functions. It is probably, I don't know this for a fact, but it's a very informed guess, the most diverse office or location in Ireland. We have over 80 nationalities here. And not onesies and twosies, but significantly large groups. The main reason for that is that community operations team that looks after the trust and safety of our users come from all these areas around the world, especially volatile areas in the Middle East and Turkey and countries like this, because we need people here that don't just speak the language of those countries to service our community, but also understand the cultural nuances in them. So very diverse, multicultural, multinational. It's also very young. The average age, we're a millennial company. We're the first Fortune 500 company to be led by a millennial with Mark Zuckerberg. The average age here is about 30 years old. Of those 1,700, I'm definitely the old fogey. They look at me strangely, but it's a real privilege and very interesting to run a site that's so multicultural, multinational, diverse, and young with millennials. So that's a little bit about the setup here. Finally, just the particular part of the building you're in now is our partner center. This is really an area we use to, I guess, showcase our family of apps and services. A lot of people, think we're still just that blue app of Facebook, but of course we have Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger, various other products, so we like to showcase those. We also showcase a lot of our technology and data centers and some of our policy-led things around, safety alerts and suicide prevention and all sorts of those kind of things we do for our users' safety. It's also an area where we showcase our big innovation, big bets for the future. So in particular, virtual reality, artificial intelligence research, and connectivity, our efforts to connect all the 4 billion people in the world who either can't afford or don't have access to the internet. So hopefully you get a bit of a chance to walk around and experience or learn a bit about that on the breaks. I should also just get a little plug in. We do have our Facebook help desk down this end here. So as you're walking around, if you want any help or want to learn anything about your Facebook strategy, how you can use Facebook better, our team are there ready to talk to you about that as well. So look, that's it. I'm going to get out of the way into the meat of the day. I just really wanted to extend a warm welcome. It looks like an amazing lineup of speakers and agenda items. I'm certainly looking forward to it. We'll get on with the rest of the day, and I'll hand you back to Irving. Thank you.
Thank you, and once again, please join me in congratulating both Garrett with Facebook and also thanking our sponsors as well, to all of our sponsors that have made this event possible. Thank you. And last but not least, before we get to our exciting opening keynote, a few quick thanks. It takes a lot to really pull events like this off, and I work with a phenomenal team. So there's a staff. We are a small but mighty team, and we are committed to this conference. That the entire team is here. So if they could just quickly raise their hand. I work with a phenomenal group of people. If you get a chance to talk to them today, make sure that you say hello to them. Also, along with the staff, there are board members here today, which also is an integral part of the direction and the strategy that we go forth. So I know there's 3 board members today: Manny Jenkins with Storyful, Steve Herman with BBC, and the aviation queen herself, Bené Wilson, is here. So thank you all as well. So without further ado, we'll get on to our keynote, and I have explicit instructions not to do long bios because they're going to get straight into the meat of this. So our upcoming keynote speakers, they're going to prefer to do a deeper dive. So I introduce Mitra Kalia, is Vice President for Programming at CNN Digital. Prior to that, she was Managing Editor at the LA Times and Executive Editor at Quartz. And Anne-Marie Tomczak is UK Editor at Mashable. Before that, she was at BBC, where among other accomplishments, she launched social media investigative unit BBC Trending. And with that, I will turn it over to our wonderful opening keynote.
Is it 10 o'clock yet? Should we just wait for the bell?
Yeah, it was supposed to be our halfway time, so we'll see how this goes. Thank you for the introduction. We also thought we'd like to take the opportunity to introduce each other. And you can go ahead and read our bios, but I have been doing some digging on Mitra, and I believe you've been doing some digging on me as well. So
Yeah, although I think you did more than I did. I'm a little nervous about this. We have not planned what we're about to say about each other, so...
Right, well, I'll go ahead.
Okay.
So I've spoken to some of your colleagues in CNN to find out a little bit about Mitra, and here are just a few of the things that they said to me. Her leadership is very inclusive. She wants to bring people with her. She's someone who's absolutely brilliant at her job. She's inspirational, and she has knowledge to think in a different way. The way she thinks is a breath of fresh air in a large legacy organization like CNN. I've got so much more I want to say. I'm going to just add 1 or 2 more things.
Wait, these are my colleagues at
These
CNN?
are your colleagues.
This is amazing. Thank you.
She has a great
I
understanding.
can't ask you for the names, right?
I'll give them to you after.
Okay.
She has a great understanding of the globalized world, and particularly working in the US, she brings that international outlook to global issues. And she's also a great listener, even if it doesn't fit with her point of view. And one last thing, she is an amazing friend. So the level of digging I did related to even Facebook stalking you. So apparently, Mitra flew across the world for a period of 24 hours just so that she could read a poem at a special occasion for her friend.
Oh, thank you.
So she's
you
also
really,
a very good
gosh,
friend.
You totally stalked me. We're not even Facebook friends. That's amazing.
Amazing what you can find out when you pick up the phone.
You're really good at this internet, huh? All right, so you're probably Googling Anne-Marie, but let me save you some trouble. So Anne-Marie Tomczak, as was mentioned, is the editor of Mashable UK, and used to work at RTE. Is there anyone from RTE here? Nobody? Oh, okay, yes, there's a few people. This woman actually used to work the overnight, and that's how she started and was there for 6 years, which I just thought was, I also previously worked the overnight, and it just proves that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. She's from Longford. Is anyone here from Longford? Wow. Really?
Up Longford.
But what I thought was amazing was that, so, you know, we had that reception last night at Google, and I said, Anne-Marie, are you going to be there? And she said, no, I got to go do this thing. And then it turns out that her school in Longford has an event where they honor students with scholarships. And so she was speaking at that event. And so it's always amazing to me that people who go on to do great things as you have, but really have a firm sense of where they came from. And I just thought that was remarkable. And then the last thing I'll say is that beyond my Google searching and kind of digging around, I talked to the woman who caught the bouquet at your wedding. So that's not an internet stalking thing. That's like a in real life, like tell me about what I need to know. And she said, Anne-Marie is known as a proponent of young women in the newsroom. People who've been working for her or with her always feel so supported and so uplifted, and applies that to their journalism. So the ability to bring our many identities, including those online, to the work that we do, just kept coming up in what everyone had to say about you, including the woman who caught the bouquet at your wedding. And we are going to dive into an area of expertise that repeatedly came up in my Google stalking on you, as well as what people said, which is video, and what the hell we need to be doing with video right now. But maybe we'll get to that a little later.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's start by talking about just how disrupted the media industry has been over the last few years. And now it really feels like there are so many spaces to populate. And it's the role of editors and organizations to decide, where do we focus our attentions on? I think that is one of the most challenging things. So how do you spot the trends, and how do you make that decision of making that choice of where to innovate?
I mean, I think this is the challenge. Like in just the time alone we've been talking, there's probably like 6 platforms that have launched, right? So some of it is platform by platform, and then just evaluating, are we going to join this or not? At CNN, our overarching goals have been, we made a $20 million investment last year, and the pillars of them were intentionally platform agnostic. It was global, mobile, and video. And you could say that platforms within each play a huge role, but by saying global, mobile, and video, it just sort of oriented people's day-to-day as they're evaluating, this thing has just, let's say, I'll be concrete, Amazon Alexa, is that fueling one of those goals in some way? And sure enough, in the time that we got on Amazon Alexa for audio, they've just rolled out a video component, right, that they're about to do. So that was a case where I felt like we were ahead. But even in the rollout of getting on the platform, they changed the platform, and so now we have to pivot accordingly. I was actually going to ask, I was going to throw it back at you, because Mashable just went through kind of a redefinition of what it stands for. And would you describe yourselves now as a video-led company? Would you say about those 3 pillars I said, or what do you guys stand for now?
Video has been a really big part of Mashable's change over the last 12 months. We've had growth of 400% in the last year. And a lot of that is largely down to how much video we've been creating, but also like where we're distributing that video and what kind of video we're focusing on. So let's take 3 examples. We are focusing heavily on our offering on Snapchat Discover. But again, we've had a pivot within that offering where we zone right down into a certain aspect of our editorial. In this case, it is tech and very heavily iPhone related. And
so meaning the stories that you're putting on Snapchat Discover.
Exactly. The audience keeps coming back, and they know what they're going to get when they go to Mashable. They know they're going to get really useful tips on how to use their iPhone. Like, these are 13 to 17-year-olds, some millennials as well. We need to think about that audience in mind. And so delivering our product for Snapchat Discover is a very different editorial mindset is required for that. And then we've been focusing a lot on video on Facebook, for example, real-time video as we call it, but also continually moving around those parameters on Facebook. You mentioned that a lot of changes happen on platforms, and I think being continually cognizant of the fact that you may need to pivot, very quickly. Otherwise, you will suffer the consequences of that.
And is it still native video on Facebook that is a part of the strategy, or is it on Mashable's own?
It's on site and it's
Site.
native. So I think also thinking about where you put video on your site and that journey of the user is incredibly important. And even when you look at like how you tag stories and how you what story is going to come next, or what video is going to come next at the end of that story that you've just read. When you look back at the data, those decisions are incredibly important. It might be a case of you're filling in your CMS and you need to get the story published and you're just trying to find the next video you can chuck in at the end. That's a waste of time, because actually it's really, really crucial to whether that user, that audience member is going to stay with you or jump off elsewhere. And mobile video, vertical video, is something we're heavily focusing on. So we had our New Front presentation in New York last week, and generally speaking, a lot of New Fronts, they will have like a big TV show or something that they'll showcase. In our case, we launched 2 new products. One of them was called Mashable Reels, which is not an app, but it is a vertical video on mobile, beautifully crafted premium video that's vertical. And the other product we launched was called Velocity Kilogram, which I can talk to you a little bit more about later. It's related to data and how you reach social media influencers.
On the vertical video front, the challenge we've had, we know that's how people are consuming video, but unless we're monetizing it, it's been hard to make the case for entire teams to reorient in that style and storytelling. Can you tell me how you did that? Is it monetized?
If you look at even Snapchat Discover, you know, it's monetized in the sense that there are ads that you can quickly swipe through or you can watch. But actually, when I watch them, I don't find the ads, like they're targeted ads, so I don't find them offensive to my experience. And there are other ways that you can get other content into that video offering, such as branded content or working with doing custom creative content. So there are several different ways that you can create revenue streams through that in a way that isn't disruptive to the audience's experience. And also, like an important point, and I've said this so many times since I've joined Mashable, branded content is not necessarily the enemy. You know, so long as branded content is really transparent and it is what it says it is, I have absolutely no problem with it. That might come across as a, you know, slightly controversial thing to say as a journalist and editor, but I find that a lot of stories that I click on my Facebook or wherever else are branded content, but I've clicked on it because it's a story I'm interested in reading, and the platforms understand what I'm interested in based on the data algorithm, so it's something that I'm keen to read. But with CNN, they are doing so much. I mean, I've keenly taken an interest in what CNN has been doing over the last few years, particularly because a very good friend of mine is heading up the social media end of things. And I mean, I've seen a massive change in CNN even in the last 2 years alone. With Snapchat Discover, what you're doing on chat apps, where is CNN really choosing to innovate and to invest?
So I think a lot of it that you're seeing is off-platform, and there's a beauty of off-platform in a legacy organization in that it allows you to have a small dedicated team that is catering to readers in that space or to audiences in that space. And so it removes a lot of the, we used to do it this way, this is the process that you have to shoehorn into this thing. So for a CNN, I think a lot of the reason that people are like, that's so cool, I wouldn't have expected that from a CNN, is because you're able to be cool, you know, on this platform. The challenge is, how do you take that and scale it? Or how do you take that and not have it be an audience of 10 who we did something really cool for, but that's great for 10 people. And again, I gotta prove that there's I think monetization and scale still really matter.
But understanding that audience as well. I mean, there are so many ways now to get that understanding of exactly how an audience has reacted to something or what they're really responding to.
Yeah.
And I would say with Mashable, for example, over the last 12 months, I've been there 7 months, using data and analytics to really drill deep and understand our audience, and then let that inform where we go going forward.
I think that's really helped us on our alerting game, actually. So Apple News is a place that we were just experimenting with more accessible language, things like a vegan diet on a Sunday morning. We alerted some story about that. And again, kind of not traditional CNN. And findings from that then help influence the main platform, right? So then it becomes, actually, when our alerts are conversational and what we've been doing on Apple News, we can bring this to the main brand and see great success. And I think our investments in other platforms have really helped us innovate on the main brand side. The other thing is that the people who are orienting to these new audiences or just have the onus of finding new audience, right? The thing about a CNN is you can kind of get complacent with, we're so big, we got our people, we know a lot about them, they like it this way, but you can't stay stuck in that. We know that to be true. I spent most of my career in newspapers, so if anyone knows that to be true, it's me. The woman who handles the chatbots that you mentioned and our efforts around messaging, Masuma Ahuja, who's actually a graduate of the ONA Women's Leadership Academy. She's amazing. But she brings that sensibility that you're talking about, like getting to know audiences, into projects like, hey, we just had the election, how are you feeling about it? Leave us a voicemail. And so 10,000 people leave us voicemails, and she'll sift through and come out with themes and stories and things that I think if she wasn't in these other spaces as intimately with audiences as she's been, the idea of taking 10,000 voicemails and establishing intimacy with that is kind of daunting, but she's totally equipped to do that. So my hope is a part of, for those of you who are in legacy brands and you're just struggling with everything from how do I get my colleagues to understand the internet to how do we stay ahead, right? How do we change our storytelling so that it's not constantly playing catch up? Some of these platforms have helped us reinvent.
I always find it fascinating at how granular you can get when you look into the audience and how deep you can drill using tools. And I say that because, for a large portion of my career, I was working as a reporter and a presenter and newsreader, and picking a good story and then just sending it off into the wilderness, broadcasting it either live or putting it out into a scheduled broadcast. And now you've got like all of this immediate feedback. And so using data to drill really, really deep is something that is relatively new to me. That's something I've been doing over the last few years. And in my role in Mashable, we work really closely with our growth team, who are our audience team, to look at like some of the minutiae of the stories. And the reason for that is because our audience are all about the minutiae. Our audience are like the obsessives. They want to know every single detail about Game of Thrones, Fantastic Beasts, Harry Potter, Star Wars, the meticulous details. But then that also applies to how we approach data and analytics and our editorial. So for example, over in the past week, in our office in London, we would have looked at Game of Thrones. And we know that our audience loves this story. But we want to know even more than that. We want to know what really specific stories about Game of Thrones do they like? Harry Styles is another example. What kind of Harry Styles stories travel well with our audience? They don't love everything about him, but they do seem to really grapple to certain stories that we put out. So I think it's really useful to use the data in that way.
Can I ask how you're actually using it? What is your day like with analytics? Is it your Chartbeat app? Is it daily reports, weekly? What are you diving into and how?
So we have a tool called Velocity that we use a lot. It was built in-house by our product team. And there are 3 different components of Velocity. One of them is called Velocity Dash, which is what I would log into first thing in the morning. So it mines the internet, and you can change the settings so that you can make it more bespoke to your region or wherever you're trying to get a sense of. And it takes in it processes millions of URLs every day. And what it does is it has predictive technology to be able to track often, a day or even 2 days ahead of what's building up traction and what's relevant to the audience. So I use that to inform my editorial.
Like a day ahead, it's predictive.
Yeah, predictive. Yeah. And it's very, very effective. And then we have Velocity CMS, which is linked to our CMS, our content management system, where when you publish a story, you can then track its progress over time and look at where it's going and who it's going to, and what kind of sentiment and reaction there's been to it. And then the third part of Velocity, which we launched last week, is called Velocity Kilogram. And this is something that would be incredibly useful for ad agencies and for creative agencies, where it looks at social media influencers. And the basic hypothesis around it is that the whole model of the social influencer is broken. So rather than shelling out £1 million to get Kendall Jenner to, do an ad for you, the new social influencer is Jenny down the road, who actually is far more influential within her network. And it's about targeting content to Jenny and to John and to Jack and to Mitra based on data. So that's just something we've just launched.
And that makes sense with patterns we're seeing, whether it's trusting your uncle and his dissemination of fake news, right, to kind of get at where some other conversations throughout the day will go, to the power of official brands. Does that scare you? Is that
well, I did a documentary all about big data last year for RTE. Some of you might have seen it. It was called Cloud Control, and it was an hour-long TV documentary all about digital fingerprints, but looking at it more from not just the perspective of social media, but looking at how every movement we make in the digital world, whether that's using your Tesco Club card or using online banking or making a purchase on Amazon or whatever it may be, it's all like joining the dots into one big huge ecosystem. And I looked at the pros and cons of big data, and there are really scary aspects to it, of course, but I think that the big learning point that I had during that documentary was to, the necessity to understand it is so great, because if you don't, then that's when it's going to take over, and that's when it becomes dangerous. So, empowering yourself with that knowledge about it and being aware of what the potential pitfalls are is really, really important. And there are so many aspects where data is being used in a really positive sense. For example, in the health industry, in the medical industry, data is being used to monitor premature babies, to get so much information from these tiny, vulnerable little beings that can't tell us what's wrong with them. And so, it's a huge topic, one that we probably don't have time to discuss in full today.
And the one way that I would say I use data perhaps differently, but related to the positive influence it can have, if I don't see stories that I really care about surfacing on Chartbeat, right? I'm pretty much glued to it all day long on my app.
I'm so glad you asked this, by the way.
Yeah, so it's one of those where I'm like, God, as an organization, we spent months chronicling some disease, or we were in Venezuela, or we have been in Mosul, and these stories aren't surfacing. What am I doing wrong? And so I start to take it very personally if I'm not seeing that thing which I care about or the organization cares about performing. And then it becomes kind of it's usually a little bit late in the game, but we can start tweaking accordingly to, is it an image, is it a headline? Like, those are the basics. But some of it is, can we find our Jennies or our people that this content will especially resonate with, so you're at least putting the grounds of organic shareability, right? There's at least a basis of an audience, which CNN, being from up here, a mainstream outlet, we're used to starting from up here as opposed to that grassroots movement around a story. And so that's been really great to see. That a small group of people can actually make something go viral on CNN, and that's feeling so powerful for me, right? It's real different.
Getting the vegetables to your audience, like, how do you get them to eat vegetables, but also really enjoy the taste of them?
When I was at Quartz, that was like the mantra, right? Like making globalization a sexy issue, or making the global economy understandable. And so I think I got, it was almost like, if you can get people to care about, demonetization in India or elections in Nigeria, I should be able to get them to care about these children in Syria, right? And in some ways, children in Syria is almost we've seen that over and over is what goes viral, and the audiences now are in a place where they're like, we wish you cared about these other things in between. So oftentimes the counter narrative, which I think Mashable's actually done some of it as well, are those stories in between and trying to lift them up and get their audiences.
I also think that the onus is on media organizations now to be much more creative in how they offer news and how they cover stories, because we're in this age with information overload. There are so many other things that are trying to grab the audience's attention. And when I think to Mashable and how it's had an editorial pivot over the last year, some would say it is a drift away from generalist news, but actually I disagree with that. It is still covering news, but it's doing it in an exceptionally creative way. And I can give you an example. We did a beautiful long form piece all about Facebook and how people talk to each other on the internet about their mental health. And obviously the story about the Affordable Care Act and the new Trump administration in the US is a big one. And this topic looked into how you discussing your mental health on Facebook and other places like that could actually affect your insurance premium. So it gets into what is sometimes seen as like a wonky story, but it brings the audience there in a way that is so relevant to them. And I think that is the challenge now. It's not just about saying X, Y, and Z happened, and this is what he said, and this is what they said. The he said, she said days are over.
Yeah.
And CNN knows this as well through like the type of commentary that you have on your channel. How do you get in that range of voices and make it really, really dynamic?
So I think we were set up here because you're digitally native and I'm probably like the legacy trying to be digital, maybe. I'm just guessing here on the programming front.
It's funny you should say that because for about 10 years I worked for RTE for about 6 years and then the BBC. So both of those would be considered legacy, and both public service organizations as well, not commercial. There are commercial arms of them, but in the newsroom it was public service. So in some respects I have been on a really, really steep learning curve as well. But I always think about how when I started in the BBC, went to television, had blinkers on, I really wanted to work in television, live newsroom environment, really exciting, and then started innovating with mobile video in the newsroom and grabbing presenters to do like share out social video while they were out in the field, which at the time 4 years ago was, believe it or not, very, very innovative. So when I launched BBC Trending, I always remember James Montgomery, who's the director of digital in the BBC. He used to say, oh, you're very TV, and I had a very TV way of looking. But when I told him I was leaving the BBC to go to Mashable, he just looked at me with this big smile on his face, and he was like, "We've converted you," and something has happened where, yes, I have been converted, and I feel like there's something so intimate about digital communication that it's just so different to television. It's not a case that one is better than the other, but there's just something really special about that. So what is your view on that?
So I launched Quartz and I loved it, but I felt like so I should rewind a little, that I essentially entered journalism intentionally to disrupt journalism, right? I felt like when I was in my early 20s, surely we could do better, surely we could be more representative, and was in newspapers. And then it wasn't until I got to Quartz where it felt like we weren't the media, it felt like we were a part of the internet.
I feel like that being in Mashable.
At Mashable, right? Like you feel like a member of the ecosystem within your
you're in some
reporting
kind of club.
on it. Yeah.
But then I would say when you're in CNN, you're also in another club.
Oh, sure.
It's quite tribal.
Yeah. It's a definite club. But it's an amazing... So my pivot was at a Quartz where it felt like you could see these stories that so matter start to bubble up, right? By saying... we need to be covering Ferguson, Missouri because Twitter is telling me so. it just happens. There isn't kind of the layers or the let's wait for this to become a story. Somebody else tells us officially it's a story, right? There's a different way of looking at what is news in a digitally native outlet. The challenge was that we didn't have the basis of the news for some of the so we were heavily aggregated, and it was smart aggregation. It wasn't just summarizing other people's stories on the internet, but it was like the smart take, and it felt like the thing that makes journalism is that it's rooted in a set of facts or truths or a search for the truth, and we might disagree on this, but it felt like I was always beholden to either other people's reporting or platforms.
Oh, I
right?
think that's so interesting that you should say that.
Yeah.
Because I definitely think that, yes, there has been a shift in the way people make editorial decisions now, and there is a danger that we'll be led by, what's trending. And, it's up to journalists to actively engage with that. So it's not like to be a slave to what's trending. But, if I covered, for example, when I was on BBC Trending, if I just covered what was trending, I'd be talking about Justin Bieber every day. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't about that. There's a whole huge World Wide Web out there, and it's the reason these stories are powerful and that they succeed is because of that interaction with the journalist. Seeing something and really engaging with it and doing something original with it.
I think that the originality of thought is so important, and I'm so grateful every day that I had that kind of awakening at a Quartz. It felt a little bit like if you got one life to live in journalism, where can you have the most impact in the way people see themselves, in their understanding of the news, in actually getting the facts? And this was before the election. I mean, this was a few years ago.
Before the whole era of fake news and post-truth. And
so then I ended up at the LA Times because I thought I could apply some of those digital lessons to the paper of record in a locality, right? In a place like, not just any locality, Los Angeles, a huge place. And could you apply some of that and possibly become more relevant to audiences, but actually you are the fact gatherers, you're the news, they're the news makers and distributors. And that didn't work out for a number of reasons, although I do think that we were able to change a lot of the culture of the LA Times by just making audiences and stories front and center. At CNN, a lot of outlets say that they just don't have the resource. This is not CNN, but a lot of outlets just don't have the resources to be in that business of getting the news anymore, right? So they're going to pick and choose. It just left me feeling like the opportunity at CNN could be, and this is where I really love what I do. We have thousands of journalists who are verifying news every day, which is so powerful. My job as the head of programming is to figure out how we distribute it in a place or in a world where more audiences are increasingly consuming fragments of news. And I saw this here and I saw this here. And so that became, I guess, the opportunity, but it's also the challenge because I look at some of what you're describing and I'm like, wow, Mashable's real nimble. And they've been able, they pivoted a strategy a year ago and it's paying off, right? And so the best thing about us is that we're big, but it can also be the most challenging thing.
Well, that leads me to what I want to ask you next, because...
and then I think we have to open it up to questions,
okay.
But go ahead.
I think this is one last question, because I think this is something a lot of people will want to know more about from you. So I worked in really big newsrooms for the bulk of my career, and the structures and just the sheer size of them is something to behold. Now I'm working in an international office. Obviously, Mashable's HQ in New York is big and it's great, but I'm in an international office, so it's a different setup. So how do you approach the structure and making sure that your teams interact with each other in the most efficient way possible? And, can you give us any insight on how it works? Because is it a case of like TV still being the jewel in the crown and, online being its poor cousin?
So Jeff Zucker, the president of CNN, checks in many, many times a day with me to see how we're doing. And I think that has reoriented the network to care about the performance of stories across platforms, television and digital, and all that digital encompasses. So that's been great. I truly think you need buy-in from the top of the organization in order to spread that message. It can't be, this is the helm, and then there's like a digital arm that kind of manages that side of it. So on that front, I feel lucky. For where I sit, because I'm in this programming role of dispatching and kind of what I talked about earlier, like we have thousands of journalists committing journalism, right?
Committing journalism.
Committing journalism. I try to really orient teams around the story and the audiences. And that kind of removes the us versus them, the video versus words, the, my team versus your team. And it's kind of amazing when you just say, look, people, I just need us to answer, what is the story we're trying to tell? Who are we trying to reach? And how are we going to reach them? And it suddenly becomes so simple. And I really cling to that as a way of managing change in a newsroom, because the one thing we can count on is that everything I'm telling you right now is about to change. But I hope those 3 questions kind of guide that change. And that's been, I think, refreshing for people to hear when they're like, oh, you're telling us a different strategy today than we had 6 months ago. And it's like, well, this room knows better than anyone else that we all have to embrace that reality, right? I mean, it's going to change.
It is, and I always think of news organizations and media organizations like a plant that where so long as the roots are good and if there are decent journalistic practices, even if your video offering is absolute shambles, you can sprinkle a bit of like fertilizer and you can make it blossom, and you can do something with that. But if the roots aren't good to begin with, then you've got a bigger problem. Yeah. So it relates back to what you're saying. I think it's time for us to open up to the floor.
There was no fire drill. I kept waiting for it. And it did? They did have a fire drill? Wow. Facebook did something for journal. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. That was a joke.
We didn't even get to talk more about algorithmic changes and all of those things that are very important.
My name is Thais, and I'm from Brazil. I study newsrooms and convergence in newsrooms in the University of Brasilia. I have a question for you, Mitra, because you are Vice President for Programming. And this name, programming, I'm in doubt of this. Why do you call yourself Vice President for Programming? Because you said you deal with the managing of and delivering of news for various platforms. And so why programming? Because programming is a word for television. Yeah, and not, question. For example, managing or another thing.
Yeah, it's a brand new position. So you're correct to pick up on, this is a weird title for digital. And in many ways, it nods to what people at a CNN or a BBC or an NPR would know, or RTE, of taking the news and programming it for television. And we're in a multi-platform, multi-channel existence now. And so programming for me literally means taking stories and audiences and linking them together. That's how I see my job. I wouldn't encourage us to take the legacy meaning of it and say you have to take the way TV does it and then apply that to these other platforms, because TV is very linear. You're seeing one story at a time generally, and then lots of text and scrolls and things around it. So I wouldn't take it too literally, and that's our intention with having that division.
And there's also a role in Mashable, Director of Editorial Programming. And for me as well, I was trying to get my head around that whole idea of programming. And it is something that, even new media organizations have people in those roles, where you think about what is your mission and what kind of external image you have on the site and how you reach the audience, what's the first thing they see when they go to your homepage, all of those things. So it's not just related to broadcast or television.
My name's Jeff Kaufman. I'm a journalist turned entrepreneur running a company called Trint that uses AI to transcribe. One of the things that you began with was talking about all these new platforms coming on. I wonder if you can each give us an example of an area that you've gone into that hasn't worked, where you've invested heavily with great expectations, and it's cost you, you've made what you could call a mistake or a learning, and what you took away from it.
Ooh, that's a really, really tricky question. I don't know if I would call it, investing heavily, but I did spend a period of time while I was in the BBC working in digital current affairs, piloting lots of new mobile video formats. And at the time, I was trying to make micro documentaries. And I was telling Mitra about this just before we came on here. One of the documentaries I was trying to make was a documentary in 15 seconds. I know it sounds mad. Trying to defy the physics of time. But I had a few months to try and throw spaghetti at the wall on that and to really innovate. And I was working with a department called BBC Taster. And I didn't end up launching any of those products, but I did feel like I had certain success because after after working on it over and over and over again, I managed to create something that was 15 seconds long, but really felt like you'd watch something that was a few minutes long. And believe me, it was hard. But what I would say about that is I think that I felt like I was in quite a charmed place at that time. Not just because I had huge support within the BBC to have the space to innovate, which was amazing and is an absolute luxury, but also because it felt like Instagram was a bit more static at that time. And, it was 15-second video, that's it. And then a couple of weeks later, they changed the duration for video, I think, to 30 seconds or a minute and a half. And I was like, okay, well, there goes that idea. So I think one of the big challenges is you're trying to innovate and do something in a space, and then it changes before you've even found your bearings and done something really cool. And I found that quite challenging.
I think that's right. I wish I've only been there 10 months, so I'm trying to think of a failure I've had, and I actually feel like there's kind of constant failures, but
Plus, I wouldn't call them failures either. In order to innovate, you need stuff not to work, because then it's as important to know what doesn't work as what does, isn't it?
Or some stuff works and you get massive reach, but you get nothing else, right? I mean, that must sound familiar to many of us, where you're like, Apple News is great. It's led to a whole new mobile audience, but we're still kind of trying to figure out, how do we monetize that? What do we get out? Where do we get out of it? Continues to be the question as we're leveraging platforms for the sake of reach. And I think most outlets are coming, most newsrooms are coming to this place of saying, but we need more than reach out of this relationship. So that's where I'm at on the question. I'll try to think of a specific failure.
Really
Find
question.
me maybe over a drink tonight, and I'll try to think of something more.
Oh,
concrete.
I can think of something. Actually, I've just come up with one more. I was trying to do what we were calling a channel in a box, basically trying to do live broadcasting on the internet before Facebook Live came out. And then Facebook Live came out, and we're like, okay, there goes that idea. So it reverts back to my point again, where you're trying to do something and innovate, and then the platforms are also scheming away, working on new things.
Or there's old ideas that come back. So we're really big into live streams right now, and they're performing brilliantly. But a few folks have said, well, we did this a few years ago, and there just wasn't the audience for it. And it was like, well, if you were trying to live stream on someone's Nokia, compared to now, I think that's sort of our answer, right? Like somebody here from Nokia. I'm really insulting everyone today. I'm sorry.
Up to 3310.
Anyway, do we have time for more questions? We really don't, Trevor. Okay. All right. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Mitra.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Mitra and Anne-Marie. Thank you to people on the live stream. Thanks to everyone in the room. We'll start the next round at 11 o'clock.